the book of Matthew, chapter 22. Chapter 22. We're kind of continuing from what we were discussing last week. For the past 2 weeks, this will be the third week now, I've been teaching about love. And our scriptural basis for that is Matthew 22 from verse 37 to verse 40. When somebody asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Actually, let's take it from 35. Let's take it from verse 35. I'm reading from the NIV version. It says, one of them, an expert of the law, tested him with this question, him referring to Jesus. Verse 36, teacher, which is the greatest command in the law? Which is the greatest commandment in the law? Right? He's asking what's the most important, like I stressed last week, he's asking Jesus, what is the most important thing? Out of everything written in the law, which one is the most important? And it's very key for us to understand what's going on here. Because it's not just asking, what things should I be doing to keep the law? His question was, which one is the most important? Which one should I place priority on? Which one should I put before anything else? And Jesus says, listen to this. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And we dealt with that last week, loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, putting God first, making God your priority. Right? And we talked about how to love God by obeying Him. And we talked about forgiveness, because one of the areas God requires us to obey Him is in the area of forgiveness, loving our enemies and things of that nature. We talked about that last week. And then the B part of this, Jesus says that loving God is the first and greatest commandment. But what I want to deal with today is verse 39. And it says, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Say, love your neighbor as yourself. As yourself. And then Jesus says in verse 40, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. And I think I touched on that last week. That he's saying that these two things, if you were to sum up everything written in the Bible, you can sum it up in two sentences, and that's to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. As far as Jesus was concerned, and that those are the most important things, and if you can get that right, you don't have to worry about anything else. So what I want to talk about today is loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And we kind of touched on loving your neighbor last week. And we talked about who's my neighbor. And we discussed that, your neighbor is anyone that you're in a position to help. And we looked at the story in Luke chapter 10, of the story of the Good Samaritan. And how there was a Jewish man, we take it was a Jewish man that had been robbed and beaten up and left by the side of the street, and the so-called pastor walks by and didn't do anything for him, and a church leader, a Levite, walked by and didn't do anything for him. And then a Samaritan came by, somebody that should have been racist towards him, because there was a prejudice between the Jews and the Samaritans at the time, and that's why Jesus emphasized that the Samaritan guy came past. And the Samaritan guy, that should have been racist, that should have kept his distance, actually ended up helping this guy. And we use that as our illustration to say that, look, when it comes to loving people, we love them regardless of the prejudices we hold against them. We love them regardless of whether we like them or not. We love them regardless of anything. Because God teaches us to love people in that way, not based on conditions. Because the God kind of love is not based on conditions. It's not a love that says, I love you because you did this for me, or I love you because you did that for me. I love you because of this and because of that. It's not based on conditions. It's a love that loves regardless. Because Christ died for us while we were yet sinners, Romans 5 verse 8. even when we didn't deserve the love of God, God loved us anyway. Okay, and that's the same kind of love He expects us to have for people. Now, somebody raised a very key question or a key point last week, which is going to be the basis of my teaching today. And they said, well, it's very difficult for you to love your neighbor if you don't really love yourself. Because you can only love people to the degree that you love yourself. If you don't love yourself, it will be very difficult to love your neighbor. Are you following me? The Bible teaches us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And many people have difficulties in loving themselves. When you don't love yourself, it will be difficult for you to love your neighbor. Because loving yourself really, what we're really talking about when we're talking about loving yourself, is that it's really an issue of self-esteem. That's what it boils down to. You know, it's just another different way of saying have self-esteem. Because when you have a good self-esteem and you're confident in yourself, you're not threatened by other people. You're not worried about what other people are doing because you're confident and you're okay with who you are as a person. So what we're really dealing with is the issue of self-esteem. And self-esteem really is not really about believing that you're better than other people. Because sometimes when you go around walking around with pride, believing you're better than everyone, it's actually an issue or evidence that you actually have low self-esteem. Because people that go around believing they're better than other people gain their significance by putting others down. And if that's how you're gaining your significance, it means that really you have low self-esteem. Because you don't feel you're worth anything until you've put somebody down. So if you only feel good about yourself when you're trampling on other people, it means you've got serious issues. It means you've got serious issues. And it needs to be dealt with. So when we're talking about self-esteem, we're not talking about believing you're better than everybody else. Because we're all the same. God created us, He created us man. You know, He created, and when I talk about man is, when we have to understand scripture properly. When God uses the word man, He's not necessarily referring to a male. God created man in His own image. Man being the spirit that He placed inside the body. And then He created man as male and female. So man is really the spirit of God that is dwelling inside this physical body. You know, if we go to Genesis chapter 6, because it's important to understand this. Okay, Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. Let's take it from verse 1. It says, "This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. He created them, male and female, and blessed them. And when they were created, He called them man." He called them, male and female, He called both of them man. So when we're talking about man in biblical context, we're talking about the Spirit of God inside the vessel called male and female. Because the real you really is the person dwelling on the inside of you. I don't even know how I got into that. What was I talking about before I went into that? Anyway, let me move on. Sorry? Self-esteem, right. So, talking about this issue of self-esteem, self-esteem is really important for you to have good mental health. Because when you don't believe in yourself, when you don't have self-esteem, when you don't have confidence, when you don't feel that you're good enough, it really holds you back from so many things in life. You're not able to confidently pursue the things that you want to pursue. You're not able to look in the mirror and appreciate what you see. And that's a very dangerous position to be in. Because you have to understand that you've been put on this earth for a purpose, for a reason. And in order for you to be able to fulfill that purpose, you have to believe that you're worth something. Because it's only that belief that will drive you to be able to accomplish the purpose for which you were created. If you don't believe that you can do it, if you don't believe you're good enough, and if you're always measuring yourself against other people and looking at what they're doing and how perfect their life is and why is my life so miserable and why don't I have this and why don't I have that, you will find yourself being trapped under the weight of the negative thoughts that you're having, and you will never be able to make progress.